He had expected the usual court proceedings, not this. He wasn't prepared to face the woman he had arrested, especially not in this setting. He glanced around the room, hoping for some sort of rescue, but the eyes of everyone present were locked on him. The judge, a stern man with decades of experience, looked at him expectantly. The other lawyers, the clerks, even the bailiffs, seemed to be waiting for his next move. Rachel, however, remained calm. She sat there, poised and confident, her gaze never leaving the officer. Her expression betrayed nothing, no anger, no frustration, just a quiet intensity. It was almost as if she was daring him to make the next move, forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. But the officer had no clue what those consequences might be. Was she going to make an example out of him? Would she press charges for false arrest or even misconduct? Or was this some kind of power play, a way for her to remind everyone who was truly in charge? The possibilities raced through his mind, but none of them offered any comfort. Rachel wasn't the only one in the room who seemed to have an agenda. The defense attorney, who had been sitting quietly until now, leaned forward, his eyes flicking between the officer and Rachel. He seemed to be calculating something, weighing the situation in his mind. The officer caught the faintest smirk on the lawyer's face, a look that told him he was aware of the underlying tension. It was clear that whatever happened next, this wouldn't be a simple court case. It was personal now. The officer knew the stakes were high. His reputation was on the line, and depending on how Rachel handled things, his career might be too. But there was more at play here than just one bad arrest. The system itself was under a microscope, and the growing tension in the rooms seemed to reflect something deeper, a mistrust between law enforcement and the legal system, a divide that could no longer be ignored. Rachel, as always, was a symbol of the law's power. But the officer's mind wandered to a deeper question. Had he been just another pawn in a system that sometimes worked against the very people it was supposed to protect? Had he been too quick to make assumptions, too eager to enforce the rules without questioning who was truly in control? The silence in the room was suffocating as the officer's fate hung in the balance. Would Rachel's response to his mistake lead to a greater confrontation between them, or would it expose even bigger flaws in the system they both served? And how much was she willing to risk to make sure the truth came out? As the gavel tapped once again, Rachel's next words would reveal more than anyone could anticipate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, thickening with every second that passed. The officer's mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. He was no longer in control of the situation. He had always believed that the law was black and white, a clear-cut set of rules to follow. But now, standing before the chief prosecutor, everything felt blurred. The sharp eyes of Rachel Martinez were like lasers, cutting through any remaining sense of certainty he had left. The judge, sensing the rising tension, slammed his gavel on the desk. Order in the court. He barked, his voice echoing off the walls. It did little to break the suffocating silence. The officer shifted uneasily on his feet, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight. He knew this moment would define his career. The world seemed to slow down as he waited for Rachel to speak, to give her next move, but she simply watched him, her expression unreadable. Then finally, her voice broke the silence again, but it wasn't what he expected. "Officer Hayes," she said, her tone smooth, but laced with something that made his stomach tighten. "You made an arrest. You acted on a warrant you thought was valid. But here's the thing." She paused, allowing the words to hang in the air, hanging like a weight over him. "The warrant was never issued. It was a clerical error, a mistake that shouldn't have happened in the first place." The officer's heart skipped a beat. A clerical error. He couldn't believe it. If that was true, then what had he done? Was he really guilty of arresting her on a mistake that had been made behind the scenes? And if Rachel Martinez, of all people, was caught in such a mess, what would this mean for the system as a whole? He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize or defend himself, but no words came out. Rachel was not finished. She stood up now, her gaze never leaving his, and turned toward the judge. The room was hanging on every word she was about to say. Your Honor. The officer thought it was just another routine arrest. A woman driving a sleek black sedan had rolled through a stop sign, and when he pulled her over, something about her attitude rubbed him the wrong way. She wasn't flustered or apologetic. She was calm, almost too calm. He asked for her license and registration, and she handed them over without hesitation. But something didn't sit right with him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him. Unshaken, confident. It made him suspicious. Determined to take control of the situation, he ran her ID. A name popped up. It was familiar, but he didn't immediately place it. He checked the system, and a minor warrant appeared, probably a clerical error, but a warrant nonetheless. That was all he needed. He ordered her out of the car, placed her in cuffs, and read her rights. She didn't resist, didn't argue. But as she sat in the back of his patrol car, she said just one thing: "You might want to double-check that." The officer ignored her. He had done his job. A warrant was a warrant. He drove her to the station, filed the paperwork, and called it a day. But what he didn't know, what he failed to check, was who she really was. Days later, he walked into the courtroom, confident as ever. He had made countless arrests before. This was no different. But as he stepped inside, his stomach dropped. Sitting at the prosecutor's table, staring straight at him, was the woman he had arrested. Only this time she wasn't in handcuffs. She wasn't the defendant. She was the state's chief prosecutor, the highest-ranking legal authority in the entire courtroom. For the first time in his career, the officer felt his confidence slip. His mouth went dry. His hands turned cold, because now the tables had turned, and he was about to find out just how big of a mistake he had made. What happens next? Stay tuned, because this is where things get really interesting. The officer, still in shock, stood frozen in the courtroom, his mind racing to catch up with what he was seeing. He had no idea who she was beyond the name on the warrant, but now he understood that mistake in a whole new light. The woman he had arrested, the one he thought was just an ordinary citizen, wasn't just anyone. She was someone who held immense power and influence in the very justice system he worked for. Her name was Rachel Martinez, and though she appeared calm and collected, her reputation was anything but. As the state's chief prosecutor, she was known for her sharp legal mind and unyielding pursuit of justice. She had put away some of the most dangerous criminals in the state, and her career had made her a formidable figure in the courtroom. But it wasn't just her professional achievements that made her stand out, it was her presence. Rachel exuded an air of confidence that made everyone around her take notice. The officer's mind spun as he tried to piece things together. How could he have missed the signs? It wasn't like he didn't know the law. He had arrested countless individuals, some of them well-known, some of them not. But this felt different. He hadn't even checked her name thoroughly enough. And now, standing before him, Rachel's eyes locked onto his with a calm intensity that made his heart race. She knew exactly what he had done, and the tension in the room was palpable. His stomach churned. Was she angry? Was she going to bring this up? He had no idea how much power she truly had in this situation. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and all he could do was stand there, frozen in place. Rachel, however, wasn't showing any sign of outrage. In fact, her expression remained almost unreadable. She glanced at the judge, then back at the officer, a flicker of something, curiosity maybe, in her gaze. The silence stretched on, the only sound the faint tapping of the gavel. No one seemed willing to make the first move. But then, just as the tension was about to break, the judge called the room to order. And that's when Rachel finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying sharpness to it. "Your Honor, I believe the officer has something to explain," she said. The room held its breath. The officer's worst nightmare was about to come true. The officer's heart pounded in his chest as Rachel's words echoed in the silent courtroom. He was caught. There was no denying it now. He tried to steady his breathing, but the air felt thick, like it was closing in around him. His palms were sweating, and he had no idea how to respond. Because if there was one rule in the old days, one lesson every outlaw learned, you never cross the widow. The warehouse stood in heavy silence. The old woman, the widow held her gaze steady, watching as the weight of recognition sank into the gang. Some shifted uncomfortably, others swallowed hard. The sergeant, still gripping onto his full sense of control, clenched his jaw. He wasn't about to let some old outlaws spook him. "I don't care who you used to be," he said, his voice tight. "You're still just one person." The widow gave him a slow, knowing smile. "Am I?" Before he could react, the low rumble of approaching engines filled the night air. The sergeant turned sharply toward the door, his stomach twisting. Headlights cut through the darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves. They weren't alone anymore. Outside, dust swirled as a line of riders emerged from the night. The rancher and the old gunslinger led the charge, but they weren't the only ones. Behind them, figures from another time, old outlaws, forgotten legends, men who had spent years in the shadows, came riding in. They weren't here for vengeance or money. They were here for ***. The biker's inside stiffened. The sergeant's confidence cracked. "What the hell is this?" The widow finally moved. Slow, purposeful. Her fingers grazed the edge of the old leather belt hidden beneath her coat, the weight of her past settling comfortably in her grip. "You took me because you thought I was weak," she said, her voice calm. "You thought you had control." She took a step forward. The men around her tensed. "But control," she added, "is an illusion." A single sound broke the air, a loud ***crack** as the warehouse door was kicked open. The rancher stood there, gun drawn, eyes locked on his mother. She nodded once. No words needed. And then chaos erupted. The bikers scrambled, some running, some reaching for weapons too late. The widow moved with precision, her old instincts taking over. The sergeant tried to draw, but his hands weren't fast enough. A single, practiced motion, and his weapon was knocked from his grip. He stumbled back, eyes wide, realizing just how outmatched they were. Outside, tires screeched. Some of the bikers tried to escape, but the riders cut them off. The old outlaws didn't need guns to make their point. A few well-placed warnings, a few swift blows, and the fight was over before it began. The widow walked up to the sergeant, who had dropped to his knees, breath rag. He looked up at her, the weight of his mistake crushing down. "Go," she said simply. "Tell the others what happened here." He didn't hesitate, he ran. The others followed, leaving their bikes, their weapons, everything. They just wanted to get away. As the dust settled, the old gunslinger chuckled. "Still got it," he muttered. The widow exhaled. She gave him a small smile. "We'll see." And with that, she turned toward the rising sun, the past finally settling behind her. But one thing was certain, no one would ever forget the night they crossed the widow ***. As the dust settled and the last of the gang disappeared into the night, a strange stillness filled the air. The old warehouse, once filled with tension, now felt empty, just another forgotten place where the past had come knocking. The widow stood in the dim light, her breath steady, her heart calm. It had been a long time since she had faced something like this, but the instincts never faded. Her son stepped beside her, glancing at the abandoned motorcycles, the scattered weapons left behind in a rush to escape. "Guess they won't be coming back," he murmured. She gave a small nod. "No, they won't." The old gunslinger leaned against a wooden beam, watching her closely. "They'll talk, you know. Word will spread." She sighed, brushing dust from her sleeve. Let it. For years she had lived quietly, content to let the world forget who she was. But maybe some names were never meant to be buried. Maybe some stories had a way of writing themselves, no matter how hard you tried to close the book. Outside, the riders who had come to her aid were already preparing to leave. Some tipped their hats, others gave her a knowing look. No words needed. They had come for her, and she had proven that even time couldn't change certain things. Respect ran deep in their world, and tonight she had reminded them all why she was once feared. Her son watched them go, then turned back to her. "So, what happens now?" She glanced toward the horizon, where the first streaks of dawn painted the sky. "Now," she said, "we go home." And with that, they mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch, leaving behind the past, the whispers, and the men who had learned the hard way. Some legends never fade. Some ghosts never rest. And in a town where stories traveled fast, one truth would be remembered above all. The widow still walked among them.